Now, today is somewhat of a marathon, and I am delighted to see all of our wonderful speakers coming on board. I can see that Osprey is with us. Hello, Osprey. How are you?
Hello, good to see you.
Yeah, thanks so much for joining us. I know that you've all been extremely busy in New York with Climate Week, and I'm secretly hoping you'll tell us a little bit about what you all got up to. But without further ado, and almost 1 minute on time, thank goodness, everybody, I would like to invite you to welcome Osprey Orielle. She is one of the early champions of rights of nature and does work both internationally and in the US. So I'll hand over to you, Osprey. And because Osprey's with us live, she can chat with us for as long as she wishes, around 15, 20 minutes, and we'll still have 10 minutes for Q&A. So if you do have questions, folks, please put them in the chat and I'll collate them for you. Thank you, Osprey.
Thank you. Thank you so much for inviting me to join you in this sort of global round of catching up on rights of nature. So thank you for hosting this, Michelle, and great to hear a little bit of the other presentations. My name is Osprey Orielle, and I'm the Executive Director of the Women's Earth and Climate Action Network, or WECAN. And I'm also honored to serve on the Executive Committee of the Global Alliance for Rights of Nature, which you heard about from Natty just a little while ago. And I'm zooming in, so to speak, from Coast Miwok lands in Northern California. So as Michelle said, I'm actually just returning a few days ago from Climate Week in New York during the UN General Assembly and also the UN Climate Ambition Summit, as we are all preparing to head to COP28 in Dubai. So as some of you might know, the UN General Assembly meets every autumn on many different topics, but it's also a time where governments meet. It's the last time they're collectively meeting before the next climate talks occur, the UNFCCC. So this year was particularly interesting because the Secretary General called for the special Climate Ambition Summit. And with that, a lot of movements mobilized for a big march. There was the largest march since the pandemic on climate. It was in New York, but there was also many sister marches that went on all over the world, like 600 mobilizations around the world in the lead up to this General Assembly and Climate Ambition Summit. So it was quite active. There was a Rights of Nature contingent that marched together. So that was really powerful. We had the goal at GARN to really make a presence at Climate Week for rights of nature as an intervention point. And because this is a really unique time, one of the things that we really are advocating for at WECAN, at our organization, but also at GARN, is really calling on the United Nations to adopt the Universal Declaration on the Rights of Nature, or on rights of Mother Earth. It's really been long needed, and we really need to do this now. So we have, as an example, the United Nations adopting the Universal Declaration on Human Rights. And there's also the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights, which are both really critically needed. But alongside these declarations and principles, it's really vital that the UN also adopt the Universal Declaration that focuses on nature, on Mother Earth, and really putting nature and Mother Earth in the center of international discourse. And when we have governments meet, we should really be talking about the rights of nature, as well as all the other negotiations that are going on. And in this endeavor, I think we have a lot to learn from Indigenous peoples who long fought for and won the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So I think this is a missing element in the global community that we really need to address. We're living in a time in which we really have to change everything about how we're living with Mother Earth and each other. That is very apparent as we're seeing so much climate disruption now and harms to our communities. And the urgency of the climate and ecological crises demand that we really completely redesign our economic and social and legal systems, because clearly the systems we're in are not working. And in our global movement for rights of nature, we're looking for revolutionary and evolutionary change for society. And really at the heart of it, I know we're asking, how can we transform our dysfunctional environmental laws and neoliberal economic systems that are really destroying people and planet. So it's a systemic approach. It's looking at, how did we get here and what are the underlying causes, the root causes? And I also want to acknowledge that much of the vision and worldview of the rights of nature framework comes from Indigenous peoples around the world and their knowledge of the natural laws of Mother Earth. So I think this is also really important to our movements, is to respect Indigenous rights and Indigenous peoples who have been talking about this framework for a very, very long time. It has different languages about living in reciprocity with the land, respecting original instructions, respecting our ancient agreements with nature. But this is a way that we can express these very, very long-standing relationships with nature in a modern context. And after decades of environmental protection laws, which certainly have achieved some notable successes, our modern legal systems have completely failed to prevent the increasing grave threats of global warming, degradation of our Earth's sacred systems of life, and the growing displacement and death of humans and other species. And I think that, it's very hard to really digest and really comprehend the level of destruction we're now seeing, and the harms to our communities. And in particular, there's concern for Indigenous, Black and Brown and frontline communities who bear the worst impacts of disasters because of environmental racism and other societal injustices. So one of the things that I think is really exciting about rights of nature, we've talked a lot about the nature component, which of course needs to be front and center, but also I think rights of nature is big enough. It's a large enough framework that it can also include some of these injustices to communities that are based on racism and patriarchy and capitalism and colonialism. And so I think that it's very interesting for us to also broaden our understanding of rights of nature as we put Mother Earth in the center and really understand to live truly sustainably and live in harmony with the earth, we actually need to change the very foundations, the very structural DNA of our legal frameworks to respect the natural laws of the earth, but also to respect all peoples and really to lift up all of our communities together. And as we've been talking about over the last, the last presentation today, the majority of the world's legal frameworks are based on treating nature as property. And this is a core problem. Our life-giving rivers, forests, and mountains are treated as property to be sold and consumed. And as properties, these natural communities and ecosystems are not recognized as rights holders. So in most legal systems, because nature is property, it's invisible to courts, which is, why this is so exciting to see in Ecuador and at the local level and in different countries around the world, a way for nature to show up in the courts as an entity. I think it's just really thrilling. So by maintaining the current structure of law that doesn't do this, we are furthering a dangerous human relationship to the natural world of ownership and exploitation. And we really have to ask ourselves, why haven't we stopped these destructive actions that are not only lethal, but also legal under our laws? So this is why we need to really have a big disruption in the current legal frameworks. We need an entirely different legal configuration that recognizes the Earth's living systems are not the enslaved property of humans. A primary premise of the Rights of Nature movement is that in order to ensure a thriving future, humans really need to reorient ourselves from an exploitive and ultimately self-destructive relationship with nature to one that honors the deep interrelationship of all life and contributes to the health and integrity of the natural world. And it upholds a relationship of reciprocity. So this is also, I think, really, again, reflecting on Indigenous people's understanding of living in reciprocity and also our own understanding of, even if we don't directly relate to ourselves as Indigenous peoples, long ago, we were all Indigenous to some place and had to understand a code of conduct that was respecting our relationship with nature and what our agreements were to live in harmony with all the living creatures of the world. And an essential step in achieving this is to create a system of earth jurisprudence that sees and treats nature as a fundamental rights-bearing entity and not as mere property to be exploited. And I'll also mention that I think it's really exciting that the Secretary General also noted that the earth jurisprudence movement is one of the largest and fastest growing movements in the world. And I think it's really exciting to understand that we're having a really big breakthrough moment. we're really advocating that breaking out of the human-centered limitations of our current legal systems is one of the most transformative and highly leveraged actions that humanity can take to create a healthy and just future for all. So that, I think, is also one of the reasons that this idea is really catching on more and more. And as climate disruption and environmental degradation increases globally, it could not be more important to highlight that exploitation and extractivism is a result of patriarchal societies, colonization, racism, and capitalism, as I mentioned earlier. And that's why I think, again, that rights of nature is so crucial at this time, is because it's a systemic change that can really look at root causes of how we got into these polycrises that we're facing right now. Because we need a way to have a framework that can address all of these common injustices that we're all facing. And this is also looking to what we call in our movement spaces intersectional movement building. It's clear that the global community needs to address these systems of oppression in an intersectional manner to move towards justice and real solutions. And I do think rights of nature can offer a vital path forward to this effort. What we're seeing in our collective work globally is that people's movements are rising to say, no more commodification and financialization of Mother Earth. We don't want a price put on the earth or on the sky, on the atmosphere, on our waters, on our forests. They're not for sale. We need to remove this marketplace and this market mechanism structure from our path forward of sustainability and how we're going to respect nature. We don't want our sacred earth, our water, our air, and forests in the marketplace. We don't want to see, as an example, carbon offset programs, which is central to a lot of the climate negotiations. These are false solutions to the climate crisis. Instead, we want to see pollution stopped at the source, and for governments, corporate actors, and all of us to live with respect and reciprocity with Mother Earth, because we just can't keep taking and extracting, or very simply, we're not going to survive. And what I think is exciting is that, we're like Mother Earth's immune system right now, and people are rising up in their communities worldwide, as you've heard from some of the other presenters, to say yes to rights of nature. Let's change our laws to live in harmony with life and, be a part of this ever-growing movement. And the last thing I wanted to say before I'll hand the floor back over to you, Michelle, is that I think one of the things that's also really exciting, when we talk about Ecuador, since that presentation was before me, is that, when rights of nature was put into the Constitution of Ecuador, hand in hand with that was also the implementation of Buen Vivir or Sumak Kalsai, which is an understanding of how to live sustainably with the earth. It's a very deep understanding that we don't have time to go into fully here. It's a concept that comes out from Indigenous peoples of the Global South, but it also addresses the economy and how we can see a way of growing and growth that is not based on endless material growth. So growth in our communities, trading, what is our growth in terms of our creativity as humans? What about growing our gardens? What about growing our different ways of relating to one another and to the earth community that are not based on capitalism? And I think it's really important that we also see how rights of nature can contribute to looking at beyond growth models of economy, looking at other ways of looking at development other than GDP. So I think hand in hand, we're also beginning to see this very refined conversation around some rights of nature and how it can impact our view of economy and what we value, and how we need to really move out of this huge consumerism mentality into respecting nature, understanding different ways of growth that are part of our human development, and that really take us away from these economic structures that have also been so destructive. So I'll leave it at that and hand the floor back over to you, Michelle. Thank you.
Thank you, Osprey. That was excellent. And I've just written down a couple of points because there's a couple of questions and many of them connect to, I guess there's two aspects. There's a couple of questions about what's going on in the US, and I'll tend to them first. And then a number of questions about the intersectional nature of rights of nature connecting with these other movements. So the first question that actually came in bear with me here, Osprey. There's a perception in Australia, particularly, that the US has a very strong fundamentalist Christian space. And someone was wondering do people who think the Bible tells them to use the world, etc., are they a particular barrier to the rights of nature ideas? And I'll just add that in the work we do in AELA, we're connected to phenomenal faith-based communities across all kinds of religious beliefs who are caring for the environment. So I don't want anyone to think that we're particularly picking on the US or on Christians. So the question is, do you find pushback in the US work from certain groups who think that the Bible or other things are telling them that the earth is an abundance just for humans?
I think that, there's been no like outright pushback from any particular groups. I think that, as you stated, I think there's a lot of faith groups who embrace the rights of nature work. But, like an exact, reference to rights of nature by a certain faith group, I've not seen that. I've not heard of that. I think, though, to sort of get at maybe the question, I think that it's a much larger question, perhaps, around the worldview that has been maintained in Western society, and perhaps, I would say within certain religions that have upheld the fact that, quote unquote, in the Bible, it states that we humans have dominion over nature. I mean, I think some of these deep-seated worldviews are still functioning and also give license to capitalism, give license to extractive economies. And I think that is dangerous. Whether a specific religious group is, opposing rights of nature, I've not heard of that, but I do sort of feel within the question this sense of these sort of deep worldviews that come out of traditional religions about our role as humans as being, above nature, that become very dangerous economically and legally, and also really undermine a healthy relationship with the natural world. So I do think that, there is some relationship between, religious sort of texts that have contributed to the crisis that we're in.
No, thank you. It's a thoughtful answer. There's a really great question from Daniel, who says, why is it that we always hear about changing the legal system, but we've never attempted to pass a constitutional amendment? In the US, we have seen tremendous positive change after a constitutional amendment. Why not try the same approach with nature's rights?
Yeah, I think it's a great question and a great idea. I mean, I think that, and I have, a lot of colleagues who are working at, on the ground with communities in the United States. I think Shannon is speaking after me and can speak to that as well. But I think the idea is that right now there's a need to build up the power to do such a thing vis-a-vis working at the community level and having some wins and having really solid rights of nature wins in local communities. I don't think the United States is ready yet for a constitutional change or an amendment of any sort. I think it's not that it won't be attempted. It's certainly being discussed by rights of nature advocates in the United States, but I don't think we're near being able to make that move quite yet. So a lot of the work is being done at the local community level or, in across the regional level. So I think we're working our way towards that.
No, thank you, Osprey. And it relates to some chat we had actually before you joined the call. Some folks were wondering why some of these changes seemed to be much more on the uptake in places like South America. And Australia is a very difficult place to make significant, and I would make like really different views into law reform. So I think we have a similar conservative legal system. It's entrenched, it's very deep, and it's also, in our case, connected to, I guess there's a lot of, let's put it politely, corporate invested interests have a very loud voice when it comes to making law reform that they don't agree with. So some of our countries, it is going to be harder to make that widespread law reform, but it's I think there's a lot of change coming for lots of different reasons. Osprey, turning back to the UN, can you tell us a bit more about, you sounded really optimistic about the UN Secretary General commenting somewhere that the Earth Jurisprudent movement is fast growing and important. I understand that, people have been trying to get the Universal Declaration for the Rights of Mother Earth into UN dialogues and discussions. Can you tell us a bit more about where things are up to? And maybe if you know the UN Harmony for Nature initiative, I was up to date with that up until a couple of years ago, and I'm not sure where that's up to as well. Can you comment on any of those points a bit more?
Yeah, I mean, it's not my overall area of expertise, but from what I do know is that, I think that there was a big push some years ago to approach the UN for a Universal Declaration on the Rights of Mother Earth, and it failed. And in its place, as you mentioned, there was the Harmony with Nature initiative instituted, and there has been several dialogues around the harmony with nature at the UN level, which I think have been really productive and good, and it's a good step forward. However, I think that given the momentum, which we've been hearing on this call today, there has been such a big momentum around rights of nature and personhood, giving personhood to nature, since that initial push to bring rights of nature to the UN, things have changed. I mean, there's a lot more momentum. So I think it failed at the time that it was originally done, not because of good effort, but just maybe not the right time. But I think this is the time to organize and to make that attempt again at the United Nations level. And so strategically, what I'm interested in is approaching the leadership of the Initiative of Harmony with Nature, meeting with them and saying, okay, now is the time. And I think there was a little bit of shyness around using the rights word in that particular initiative. Like harmony with nature was much safer than dealing with rights for all the reasons, hopefully everyone kind of can understand on this call is, when we're talking about legally instituting rights, it makes things very different. It makes it legally binding. It's where the real nitty-gritty work actually needs to happen. So I'm a real proponent and excited about, really making this effort at the UN level now to push for the rights of nature as a universal declaration.
That's really exciting. And I agree with you. Times have changed, as we heard from Mari Margul this morning in a pre-record. And I always ask Mari, can you reflect on how attitudes have changed since the early days of talking about rights of nature versus today? And certainly the momentum of developments around the world makes the conversation not so much easier, but often a very different one. So for sure. And finally, can we talk a bit more about the work, especially that you guys do around the intersectional movements, bringing different movements together? And that's why I'm a great admirer of your work, of course, because of your women's agenda, your feminist agenda, but also identifying environmental racism and the connections with rights of nature and other issues. Did you want to just talk a little bit more about the work you guys do? Sorry, you guys, you lovely human beings, do to promote not just women, but women of color and other people across your ambit of work?
Yeah, thank you for the question. I mean, I think that we're in a time where it's very important to of course, we need Mother Earth in the center of the conversation, given the climate environmental crisis. At the same time, for us at WECAN, and I think others in the movement as well, that we need to approach it with a climate justice framework. And what I mean by that is that, what we don't want to do is repeat old patterns of white supremacy as we protect nature, meaning that, we're protecting nature, but ignoring Indigenous rights or pushing Indigenous communities off their territories to protect nature. No, this time has to be with a justice framework, meaning that, while we protect nature, we need to remember Indigenous peoples are the best custodians of their land and have the rights to be on their own territories. And I think in this old framework, which we don't want to repeat, we could sort of see people saying, well, we just want to protect these areas of nature, but who gets to use those places and who are they being protected for? So I think it's very crucial that we have a climate justice lens as we approach rights of nature work and make sure that communities who are being harmed first and worst, or those who are protecting their territories like Indigenous peoples, are included in the dialogue. And as I was mentioning earlier, I mean, what I think is exciting about rights of nature is that when we think about ourselves as nature, that we are nature also, including the trees and the forests and the mountains and the rivers and the oceans, that when we include ourselves as human beings, that means all human beings, of every background and every heritage. And so how does that also further our work for climate justice, and so that we can all live and create a future that is equitable, meaning for nature, for all people, for Indigenous, Black and Brown communities, frontline communities, for women who are also, kind of in double trouble because of both being, if you're a woman of color and you're a woman, then you have, double oppression, if you will. And so I think our rights of nature movement is and can be and needs to continue to be pushed to be broad enough to understand when we're talking about nature, we're also talking about the human beings within nature, that we are nature. And so it needs to have a real intersectional analysis. And also when we are, advocating for rights of nature, that we ensure that we include the rights of humans as well, and especially those who are, being oppressed first and worst.
Thank you, Osprey. One more question has come in, and I might frame it in terms of there is a lot of discussion about the work of Indigenous people in the rights of nature movement. Here in Australia, there's often a difficulty in bringing together notions of what some folks call a Western idea about rights, when other Aboriginal friends talk about a law of obligation. So the work I do with Indigenous colleagues is first and foremost about what is our obligation to care for country, care for place, and in what ways can we push back at Western law to reflect those views, but to put it in a language that Westerners can understand. Now, that's just an introduction to how AELA does some of its work, because in the recording that Hugo Echeverria has done, in the Q&A, he talks a bit about the extent and limitations of Indigenous voices inside the law reform that's happening in Ecuador. So I do suggest folks have a look. That's a very long-winded way of introducing this question for you, Osprey. Someone has asked you, and I'll let you answer it. Are you concerned that putting so much emphasis on the practices and beliefs of Indigenous peoples may raise future legal concerns regarding the Constitution and the separation of church and state? It's an interesting question, because in some places people would say Indigenous people are absolutely not being considered. This question's implying that there's a lot of emphasis put on Indigenous people's involvement. Did you have any thoughts? And you don't have to respond if...
Yeah, no, I'm happy to respond. I mean, I think that how I view it is that I think that it's absolutely critical. Actually, I'm very unconcerned about centering Indigenous rights, Indigenous peoples, because for a variety of reasons. One is that 80% of all the biodiversity left on Earth right now is in the hands and lands of Indigenous peoples. Okay, and there's a reason for that, which is their traditional way of life, their understanding of right relationship with nature, their values, and their connection to the land. And I could go on and on with their traditional ecological knowledge examples, but I won't due to time. But to me, I think that one of the reasons that we're in this crisis, not the only reason, is that because of colonization, we have really damaged some of the most incredible knowledge keepers that humanity has ever seen. And those are Indigenous peoples. And as I say, there's the biodiversity factor, and also the fact that, most of us are not living on our own lands. We're living on stolen lands where Indigenous peoples have been living and have understood the ecosystems, have understood the ways of life of all of the web of life where we live. And so I think we all have, first of all, we should be respecting Indigenous rights just because ethically it's the right thing to do. And then secondly, I think we all have a tremendous amount to gain by centering Indigenous peoples and learning from them and their wisdom at this critical time in history. So I'm not concerned at all about it. I think, in fact, we need to give lots more space and time to Indigenous knowledge keepers, to Indigenous rights. And also, I would just say legally, there is also, as I mentioned earlier in my talk, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which is recognized globally. And within that framework, there's something called free, prior, and informed consent, or FPIC, which means that Indigenous people actually have tremendous power in deciding, whether or not they give consent for some dangerous project or extractive mining project or logging project to happen in their territories. Now, it's not always recognized. And one of the things that we do at our organization is really fight for people to have FPIC be recognized and true consent to take form and to be respected. But my point being is that I think there's an enormous amount of power that Indigenous people have in their rights and territories that not just benefits them, but all of us. And if we all have respect for that and support that leadership, I think we all have a lot to gain. And so I would just leave it at that. I just think that it's, something that we are, strongly believe in is uplifting human rights, Indigenous rights, and rights of nature and women's rights simultaneously, because it really addresses a lot of these systems that have been oppressing all of us for a very long time. And I would just like to close on one note, because I think my time is probably up. I hope I can do a 2-second commercial. I did talk about—
Please do. No, we love commercials about everyone's
commercial. I have a new book coming out called The Story Is in Our Bones: How Worldviews and Climate Justice Can Remake a World in Crisis. And there's a chapter completely dedicated to rights of nature, and another chapter that goes into rights of nature. And a lot of folks who've been on this call are in the book. And I see that my dear friend and colleague Shannon Biggs is up next, and she's in this book and her wonderful organization, Movement Rights. So thanks so much for having me. And I hand it back to you, Michelle.
Thank you so much. And I'll put a link in for Osprey's book. We love people promoting their books and ideas through Earth Laws Month. That's what it's all about. So thank you so much for your time, Osprey. And I look forward to staying in touch again over the coming year and beyond. So now
thanks so much for having me. And thanks for your beautiful work and bringing us all together like you always do. Thank you so much.
Thank you, love. Thank you.